And you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. Israel launches its long-awaited ground offensive into Gaza City and opens a new 48-hour route for civilians to flee. Hundreds of thousands remain sheltered amid fears of permanent displacement, as officials warn the operation could last months. Ukraine says 3 civilians are killed and more than 50 are injured in Russian strikes over the past day. Moscow launches 172 drones and multiple missiles, with air defences downing most, but 36 weapons still hitting 13 locations. The Prince and Princess of Wales join King Charles and Queen Camilla to welcome President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania to Windsor Castle. The state visit features royal pageantry, trade talks, and police arrests over a castle projection scandal. The German, British and French foreign ministers hold talks with Iran's top diplomat on Tehran's nuclear program. The call follows European powers triggering a 30-day deadline to reimpose sanctions if no deal is reached. German national Christian Bruckner, the prime suspect in the 2007 disappearance of Madeleine McCann, is freed from prison after serving time for a separate rape conviction. Prosecutors say he has not been charged in the McCann case due to lack of evidence. Utah prosecutors say they will seek the death penalty for Tyler Robinson, accused of killing conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Court documents revealed text messages where Robinson allegedly confessed, saying he had enough of his hatred. Yulia Navalnaya says foreign lab tests on biological samples from her late husband Alexei Navalny confirm he was poisoned. Navalny died suddenly in a Russian prison last year, with the Kremlin dismissing claims of foul play as nonsense. Trump extends TikTok ban in delay until December the 16th as US and China trade talks continue, according to reports. Both sides share interests in resolving the TikTok issue, with China pledging to review technology exports and intellectual property matters in accordance with the law. Now we start in the Middle East, where in his weekly general audience, Pope Leo has expressed solidarity with the population of Gaza, saying that civilians have once again been forced from their land and were living in unacceptable conditions. Let's take a listen in.
Esprimo la mia profonda vicinanza al popolo palestinese a Gaza, che continua a vivere nella paura e a sopravvivere in condizioni inaccettabili, costretto con la forza a spostarsi ancora una volta dalle proprie terre. Davanti al Signore Onnipotente che ha comandato «Non ucciderai» e al cospetto dell'intera storia umana, ogni persona ha sempre una dignità inviolabile da rispettare e da custodire. Rinnovo l'appello al cessate il fuoco, al rilascio degli ostaggi, alla soluzione diplomatica negoziata, al rispetto integrale del diritto umanitario internazionale. Invito tutti ad unirsi alla mia accorata preghiera affinché sorga presto un'alba di pace e di giustizia.
This comes after overnight Israeli strikes reportedly killed at least 16 people, including women and children, across various parts of the Gaza Strip, including Gaza City and refugee camps. The Israeli military has confirmed that over 350,000 Palestinians have fled Gaza City, seeking refuge in the south as violence escalates. This comes after the United Nations estimated that Gaza City and its surrounding areas were home to around 1 million people at the end of August. We're now joined.
هنا بدي انزح من التشريعي زي ما امرونا اليهود على المواسي خان يونس على الدير، لانه اليوم اول يوم بدا عمل الجيش الاحتلال عمليته البريه، وانا خايف والله على اولادي. انا عائلتي مش قليل، معي 6 انفار وانا مرتي ولد 6 انفار، ومعنا شويه عشاء نشرد فيهم، نشرد يعني بطولنا بس بطش. عشان هيك والله اليوم هي فكفكه، هذا فكفتش البنك حرق خيمتي واخذت ما ظل من عفشي. هيني طالع زي الناس، هي سبب. والله هي شغله بشغله خوف، انا خايف على صغاري بس. انا ولا بخاف من الجيش ولا بخاف من حدا. الموت موت واحد، لكن الصغار صرعوني وبيصرخوا. والله احنا تعودنا على صوت القصف، على صوت الطخ، صوت الرصاص، تعودنا. ليش صار عادي وقلبي عادي، بس الصغار صرعوني. مش هاين علي اشوفهم.
We're now joined by Yossi Kapawasa, who is an Israeli intelligence and security expert, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Yossi, always a pleasure to talk to you on these issues. Yossi, of course, Israel has now started its ground offensive with now 350,000 Palestinians now leaving Gaza City, a total population of around 1 million people. So that leaves the total around 650,000 people still left in a war zone, a place where Israel is seeking to completely control. I want you to talk to me about why Israel is only leaving 48 hours for this exit route to be open for. They have announced 48 hours for civilians to evacuate. And what will happen to those civilians if they choose to stay put in their homes?
Well, first of all, this is not the first 48 hours that we give them in order to evacuate.
Apologies, I'll rephrase my question. I meant this additional corridor that has been opened for these civilians to leave Gaza City, which has been opened by the Israeli army today.
Yeah, but the evacuation started already several weeks ago, and we are calling on the population to leave because we are afraid that they are going to be in harm's way. We don't want to harm them. We have prepared for them places where they can be much safer and provided with medical and humanitarian aid that they're going to be in a much better condition once they leave, and then they will be able to come back once the military operation is over. That's what we are trying to do. We care about them. Those who don't care about them are Hamas, who are trying to force them to stay inside Gaza City while the war is going on. That's the attitude of Hamas, and on top of the conflicting information coming in about what they're doing with the Israeli hostages. All of that could have been avoided if Hamas would have released the hostages and asked for a ceasefire that is going to allow them to lay down their arms. If this is going to happen, then the situation for the population of Gaza would have been much, much, much better. But Hamas insists on not releasing the hostages. And that's what we are. That's why we are where we are.
Yossi, a lot of people are staying put in Gaza because they fear that they will not be able to come back to their homes. Forced displacement, of course, a crime under international law. Yossi, do you think the worries of those Palestinians who fear that they won't be able to return to their homes in Gaza City are warranted?
Well, it depends. If Hamas will give up the hostages and will be ready to lay down their arms, nothing is going to be harmed, and the homes will be waiting for them. If there's going to be a war and the Hamas is going to use these facilities in order to fight against us and shoot at us from within these buildings and booby trap them and so on and so forth, as they do, then we shall have to take action in order to defend ourselves while we are moving in. And we are not going to be letting the Hamas to use these buildings in order to harm us. That's exactly what's happening. We are asking Hamas to lay down their arms and to release the hostages. That's what we are asking them to do. Eventually this is what's going to happen anyhow, but they want the Palestinians to go through the suffering of that. They believe that the suffering is playing in their hands, that the suffering is going to create criticism of Israel around the globe and steps taken against Israel and so on and so forth. And they seem not to understand that regardless of whether they're right or wrong, they hold they're wrong, but even if they're right, Israel is going to do what needs to be done in order to release the hostages and defeat Hamas. That's something that's going to happen anyway. So it's a pity that the population is used by the Hamas in order to, as both as human shields and as a political token. And the population wants to leave. It's not a war crime or anything like that. On the contrary, when we are carrying out this operation inside the city, the right thing to do is to let the population out so that we should be able to fight against the terrorists themselves and not harm the civilians that are there. And it's Hamas that prevents them from leaving. Some of them were prevented from leaving with gun pointed at them. That's why they hesitate.
Yossi, we have had a statement today from IDF officials saying that this assault could take months to complete. How do you think this is going to fees with both the international community and, of course, the Israeli public? We've seen hundreds of thousands of people walking the streets of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and other Israeli cities, and, of course, the hostage families who believe that this offensive into Gaza City is endangering their lives as well.
Well, the reason it's going to take months is because we are very careful. We don't want to hit the civilians, and we don't want to hit the hostages that are there in the hands of Hamas. That's why we are so careful. We also don't want to cause harm to our own troops. That's why we are moving very slowly and gradually. And at any given point, if Hamas decides to release the hostages and lay down their arms, at any given point it can come to an end tomorrow morning. This afternoon it can come to an end if Hamas does what it is expected to do. But unfortunately, Hamas insists on fighting back and putting everybody in harm's way. And that's why it might take months, because we are very careful and we have to make sure that we don't take too many risks and risk the hostages in the first place. Now, regarding the demonstrations inside Israel, well, Israel is a democracy, so, and anything we are divided. And there's freedom of demonstration and freedom of speech, and everybody can express their opinion. Everybody can understand the families of the hostages. We are all feeling with them. We are all worried that something is going to happen to the hostages. The chief of staff has promised to fight very carefully and make the utmost effort in order to avoid hitting the civilians and hitting the hostages as well. That's the way we fight. And, but they are, of course, concerned, and we can understand that. And the government has to look not only for the well-being of the hostages, but also at the well-being of the state of Israel and its future, and the future of Israel, and to a large extent the future of the West is depending on the results of this war in Gaza City. The Israeli victory is a victory for all free world. Okay. In its confrontation with the forces of barbarism, and I hope we should prevail.
Okay, Yossi Kapawasa, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move over to Europe with our next story, where the Kremlin has strongly rejected the European Union's plans to accelerate the phase-out of Russian energy, saying sanctions will not force Russia to change course. The Russian government maintains that it is unaffected by the sanctions and continues to defend its interests. On the topic of the United Nations Security Council, the Kremlin expressed support for reform, though it acknowledged that reaching consensus is nearly impossible given the conflicting positions of many nations. Additionally, the Kremlin responded to Trump's warning of further sanctions, emphasizing Russia's openness to resolving the Ukraine conflict through diplomacy. We are now joined by Keith Vaz, who is a former UK minister, and he joins us live from London. Keith, thank you very much for joining us. Good afternoon from Delhi. And the Kremlin insists that sanctions will not change its course. How sustainable is this defiance, given the EU's accelerating push away from Russian energy?
Good morning from London. The situation remains that sanctions have been perpetrated against the Russians for a number of years, but Russia is still there. And by all accounts, it seems to be thriving. So although there are threats coming from Ursula von der Leyen about packages of measures against the Russians, frankly, they don't really seem to have had much effect, because Europe and other countries are still dependent on Russian energy. If Russia stopped producing that energy, it would have an effect on the world markets. In other words, it would cost more for everyone. So far, there has been not that much change in the way in which the Russians have operated.
Yes, and do you think that Russia could realistically pivot to other markets like Asia, some say you could also say it already has, fast enough to offset the EU's phase out here?
Well, I'm sure they have done. I don't think they're waiting for Berlin or Paris or London, even though we're not in the EU, to make these decisions. I would imagine they've already got alternatives. They've got a very good and strong relationship, for example, with the with India. And there is no reason why that relationship should not continue, despite every efforts of the United States to try and stop this. The more the US does it, the more Russians continue to develop these relationships. We saw that very interesting meeting in Sochi. Russia was part of the meeting at Shanghai. So they're not hanging around waiting for the EU. They are finding other markets.
Yes, Keith, do stay with us. We have further updates from Europe. We now move on, where US President Donald Trump has formally begun his unprecedented second state visit to Britain. On Wednesday, King Charles and the royal family will host him with full ceremonial honours at Windsor Castle, which includes a carriage procession, gun salutes and a state banquet. The visit is expected to advance more than $10 billion worth of investment and trade deals. But Trump's arrival has stirred mixed reactions. Londoners were divided, with some praising his leadership and others calling the visit outrageous. Protests flared in Windsor, where images of Trump and Prince Andrew alongside Jeffrey Epstein were projected onto the castle walls. Police confirmed 4 arrests linked to what they described as a public stunt. Let's in fact listen in to what some local residents of Windsor had to say.
I quite like Trump, yeah. I think he does a good job for what he does. Yeah, he's trying to make America great again, and I think we need someone like that over in England. I think politicians are useless at the moment. So.
Do you think he's welcome in London? Are you happy he's here?
I'm happy he's here. Yeah, I've got no problems with him at all. Yeah, I'm quite happy with him. Yeah, I can't see what the protests are about, really.
I like Trump. I've never had an issue with him. Of all the US presidents, I like Donald Trump. I think he has good principles. People could say a lot about him. At least he's trying to stop wars, especially in Ukraine. I think there's been a lot of suffering. A lot of people are dying unnecessarily, or because of people's egos, or whatever the politics is. But it's enough of the bloodshed. A lot of people are dying, and it's not really fair. I'm a Christian. I believe that we should all live in peace and love.
Apologies, they were from London, those points of view. Meanwhile, adding to the economic spotlight, Google has announced a new $6.8 billion investment in the UK, with company president Ruth Porat calling it part of a growing US-UK special technology relationship. Let's take a listen in to what the chief investment officer of Google had said.
I can tell you that at Google we do. It's not just because I was born here. We have more than 7,000 people here. It's been a wonderful home to Google for 20 years. And that's why we're excited that we're announcing another £5 billion investment over the next couple of years. And that's just the next 2. And hopefully we'll see what comes from.
We're once again joined by Keith Vaz. Keith, this is Trump's second state visit, of course his second presidency. Many will be looking at the images coming out and remember he first met the Queen, infamously walked in front of her. This is unprecedented for a US president. What does this say About the importance Britain places on ties with Washington, especially within the climate right now, in an unpredictable world with Donald Trump at its helm.
Well, what it says is that Britain has apparently no other friends in the world. They have to develop a relationship that's stronger with America because Britain chose to leave the EU. And therefore, there's nobody else that they can deal with apart from the Americans. So I think probably Donald Trump will get more out of this than the British Prime Minister, because President Trump presumably wants a distraction from his domestic affairs that are going on in the United States over the publication of the Epstein files, for example. And this is a very nice distraction. It seems like a long way to come for dinner in Windsor, because he's not going to meet members of the public for fear of what members of the public might do or say. And as you say, we saw the projection of the Trump-Epstein pictures on Windsor Castle. I don't know how these people managed to do this. It's absolutely incredible. But, you know, because security must be very tight. If they can put these images on Windsor Castle, what else can they do? They must be very inventive. I don't know how they think about these things. Anyway, he's there. He's at Windsor Castle. He will be treated in the appropriate way by the British monarchy. And he will go back in 2 days' time and say what a wonderful show it's been. So what we get out of it practically, I'm not quite so sure. Parliament is not sitting. I remember the last time we had an American president come to visit us, it was Barack Obama. I was in the audience for that, and Obama was greeted like a superstar, walked down the middle of Westminster Hall. I had the pleasure of shaking his hand, as did my sister, who's also a member of Parliament. We were both there together. I have watched it since, but it's interesting because Obama is arriving in London next week, and he's going to the O2 to meet real people, and it's sold out. The tickets are so expensive, many of us can't even afford to go there. So it'll be interesting to see the contrast between the visit of Trump and Obama.
Yes, Keith, Vaz, thank you very much for joining us. We will, of course, keep you updated on Trump's visit to the UK as we get those updates. Keith, do stay with us. We have more updates from Europe. Yulia Navalnaya, the wife of late Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, has said that the leader was killed by poisoning. She has said in a post on X that laboratory analysis of smuggled biological samples has found he was killed while incarcerated in an Arctic prison in February of 2024. Navalnaya has also posted a corresponding video discussing how her husband was treated in prison. Let's take a listen into her statements.
My husband, Alexei Navalny, was poisoned. These are not empty words. I have every reason to say this. He died in a penal colony beyond the Arctic Circle. He was transferred to this remote, closed-off place 2 months before his death, clearly on purpose. Over the 3 years he spent behind bars, his conditions got worse and worse. They didn't just want to kill him, they tried to break him.
Navalny was President Vladimir Putin's most formidable critic for years. He died in mysterious circumstances while serving a 19-year prison sentence on a string of charges widely seen as retribution for his campaigning. He was an anti-corruption campaigner who had rallied hundreds of thousands across Russia in anti-Kremlin protests and was previously poisoned in 2020 while campaigning in Siberia and flown to Germany on an emergency evacuation flight where he spent months recovering. On his return, he was convicted on a series of charges, including extremism. Russian authorities said he died suddenly on February the 16th of 2024 after falling ill while outside walking after lunch in his prison colony. Following Navalny's death, officials refused to release his body for days to his relatives. Navalnaya has always maintained that her husband was killed on Putin's orders. The Kremlin denies the charges. We are once again joined by Keith Vaz to discuss this further. Keith, a compelling statement from the widow of Navalny there. What more can you tell us about the man, Navalny, who his widow there is claiming that he was poisoned on the direct orders of Vladimir Putin?
Well, obviously, this is a very serious case, and I don't think relatives of people who have died in this way are they're under great pressure. They have a lot of worries as to how their loved ones have died, and this particular lady has a view as to what happened to her husband. It is a view, I think, that is backed up by serious commentators and serious authorities, so it should be taken seriously. I think, but what can you do? I mean, you can make these claims, you can substantiate them, these claims, but what further action can be taken? That is the main problem that is facing her. She has got, quite rightly, the spotlight of the media on this subject because people are concerned. It's a very unusual death. But the fact is, it needs to be pursued. But how do you pursue it? Where do you go? Where is the international arena through which you can prosecute such activities? It's very difficult to know. I mean, these kinds of cases, I dealt with them when I was a Foreign Office Minister, are best dealt with when heads of government meet together or foreign ministers meet together, and then they raise these cases. The trouble is nobody's meeting with President Putin. So you can't really raise a case when you can't put the view to a third party, or in this particular case, someone who they accuse of being involved in these activities. So we don't really know where it's going to go from here.
Yes, thank you very much, Keith Vaz. Pleasure to have you on the programme, and thank you, as always, for taking the time. We now move on and over to South Asia, where relatives have held funerals in Nepal for loved ones who were killed in the recent anti-graft protests that brought a change of government in the country. Nepal also flies the national flag at half-mast during the Day of National Mourning. Relatives have been seen desperately trying to console distraught people whose loved ones' bodies were brought out of the mortuary and taken for their last rites at Panchupantia temples. Hundreds of friends, family members and even strangers attended the procession as the bodies were driven through Kathmandu roads. A national flag was placed on each coffin, which was escorted by a police guard of honour. At least 72 people died and over 2,000 people were injured in relation to the unrest of what are being called the Gen Z protests, which were led by young people frustrated at the lack of opportunities in the country and the corruption within the government. We are now joined by Shruti Dasgupta. She is an international affairs expert and she joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Shruti, for joining us here on the programme. Shruti, some very sad scenes coming out of the Nepalese capital as we're seeing by those visuals. 72 people, of course, lost their lives during those protests. However, a new government has been set up. Do you think Nepal will now see some stability after those 5 days of protests which saw the deaths of so many people?
Greetings, Thomas. Thank you so much for inviting me. I do hope that Kathmandu and the rest of Nepal is finding peace within their soul. Godspeed to the people who have struggled to ensure that the corruption found the right light and there was a regime change that occurred in Nepal. This funeral procession, right from Pashupatinath temple to their last rites, was something that was a demand placed by Hami Nepal, which was the NGO that was heading the protests. Apart from this, there were other demands also placed towards the interim Prime Minister, Sushila Karki. So I believe that with at least some of these demands met, due respect given to the departed, would bring down the public furor and would place more faith in the new administration. It is already quietening down. I believe the India-Nepal border has seen lesser activity. It is quieter, and the smaller towns have also kind of had their fires put out. So I hope that the administration, that the students have themselves placed on the throne, would now work towards the welfare, address the points of contention, and ensure that law and order comes back into the land of Nepal. I do hope that the elections that have been promised in March of 2026 are held, and any student association or any other political party that wants to participate is ready to rejig its cadre and ensure that the right voices are heard, and rather than the repeat of the past 13 fallen governments from 2008. So my wishes are for the people of Nepal. I hope they do get what they have hoped for while losing the lives of their very young students.
Yes, thank you very much, Shruti Dasgupta, for joining us here on the programme. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We now move on once again, and our final story this hour. Soccer player Thomas Partey on Wednesday appeared in a London court and pleaded not guilty to charges of rape and sexual assault involving 3 women. Partey is accused of 5 counts of rape relating to 2 women, plus a charge of sexual assault against a 3rd woman between April 2021 and June of 2022. The 32-year-old player appeared in the dock at Southwark Crown Court and spoke openly only to confirm his name and date of birth and to enter his not guilty plea. Partey was released on bail ahead of his trial, which was listed for November the 2nd, 2026, and is due to take between 6 and 8 weeks. Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more updates